One common criticism I've encountered over the years, with some justification I think, is that most of what I say on this channel is just pointing out how things are so bad and so terrible. In the absence of any suggestion of how things could be different, all I'm doing is spreading negativity. Of course, you cannot satisfy everyone, but I do feel that one of the strengths of this video series is that I've tried to sketch out in extremely broad terms how we could actually think about our world in new and different ways. However, I haven't got much to say about how to actually get there. The lack of a strategy for social transformation is probably one of the most glaring flaws of this entire project, in my opinion. All I can do, apart from acknowledging the existence of this flaw, is to briefly explain why I haven't devoted much attention to it. To put it bluntly, I haven't the slightest clue about what to do, nor am I actively involved in any organizational work that is directed towards an ecological cause. So, I don't think I'm in any position to preach to other people what they should do. There are plenty of other sources out there for people who are interested in these questions, and I'll leave it to you to find them and figure out for yourself what you want to do with all this information. My only suggestion in this regard is to be wary of people who are extremely confident that they have come up with the best strategy for social transformation. In my mind, those people are either fooling you or fooling themselves. So with that general criticism out of the way, let's move on to more specific criticisms which I think I should address. So let's address the elephant in the room, I guess. It is not very fashionable to criticize science in our culture, and if you do so, you are likely to be lumped in with flat earthers, religious nutjobs, and new age weirdos. So, just for the record, I want to state that I am not against science as such, and I'm certainly not suggesting we turn away from science and embrace some superstitious mumbo jumbo. If I've done my job well, I hope you will understand, even if you don't agree, that what I am against is the notion that the scientific project is the only game in town when it comes to saying something truthful about what reality is and how we should relate to it. Intellectual arrogance aside, this attitude is particularly bothersome to me because what science usually says denigrates very important parts of the human experience. It tells us that all of reality is, as Whitehead put it, the meaningless hurrying of dead matter, that our brains are just computational machines and our consciousness is an unimportant byproduct of our brain's hardware, that our subjective experience of being alive, characterized by feelings of love and beauty, right and wrong, is illusory and meaningless, that we are, as Jacques Monod said, like gypsies living in an alien world who don't really belong here, and that in the face of these undeniable facts, the only thing we can do is to use our knowledge to control and dominate everything around us. I was recently reading Cormac McCarthy's novel Blood Meridian and felt that this latter sentiment was perfectly captured by the murderous Judge Holden when he says, "Whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. Knowledge is the gateway to power. That is the mantra of the scientific capitalist age." I think this mantra is partly responsible for our social and ecological problems, and if we have to find a way out of this mess, science has to change. If we can exercise some humility and acknowledge that our facts rest on abstractions and metaphysical assumptions, if we can tone down our urge to locate causality solely at the level of subatomic particles, then I believe that there is a way to talk scientifically about the human experience without disparaging its most crucial parts, and that can maybe contribute to dealing with the serious issues we face. I think this is what Whitehead tried to do with his philosophy of organism, what the physicist David Bohm tried to do with his implicate and explicate orders, and what Gregory Bateson was trying to do with his ecology of mind. To shed a bit of light on Bateson's project, Anthony Cheney writes, Bateson's belief was that the new science of complexity and interrelatedness allowed people to think and talk about things such as their relationship with their ecology, war, psychological pain, and right and wrong with scientific rigor, without resorting to mysticism or moral preachments. Bateson insisted that depictions of reality were self-reflective and reinforcing, and so if people accounted for the reality beyond themselves as material, amoral, and mindless, then they would account for themselves as amoral, mindless machines. But if people attributed to the reality beyond themselves the complexities of mind, they would not strip out from their analysis issues of right and wrong, and an account of themselves as moral beings would follow suit. I could of course be wrong about all this, but this is what I believe. If that makes me a crank, I guess I'm okay with that. Some of you may have noticed that in my discussion of modern subjectivity, I briefly touched upon but did not fully discuss the role of religion in contemporary society. Of course, the death of God in the Nietzschean sense did not mean that everyone stopped believing in God and religious institutions ceased to influence society. How religions evolved in the post-scientific revolution era, how they adapted to their new social role, how imperialism and colonization impacted the development of religions in the global south. These are questions I'm very much interested to answer, but I don't know much about. I definitely want to research this subject in the future, and if it works out, I'll probably make a video about it. Right now, I only have a few random thoughts about this, which I'll just blurt out and see how it goes. I don't think it is unreasonable to claim that the influence of religious institutions in our current period, and probably in all earlier periods too, has on the whole been quite negative. By its insistence on dogma over debate, by its alliance with state power, by its support of violent regressive rituals and practices, and by its willing participation in being used as a manipulative tool to dull the mind and pit people against each other, religion has justifiably earned the ire of secular scientific individuals. Everyone is aware of these flaws of organized religion, but given our discussion, I believe we can add an ecological dimension to our criticism. Religious philosophy is replete with ideas that promote love and respect for the larger natural systems we are a part of and depend upon, and argue that there is an underlying unity that connects every being. What different religions choose to call that unity obviously varies, but I'm not concerned with that. What matters is that religious philosophy possesses, in Batesonian terms, a systemic aspect. That is, an appreciation of the fact that human life is dependent on the well-being of the larger system. Now, this appreciation should, theoretically at least, lend itself quite well to an ecological sensibility. The fact that this is not so, that popular religion is more about empty ritualism and dividing people than about loving the whole system, constitutes, in my opinion, a major failure of religious practice in the contemporary era. To give an example from the religion I was raised in Hinduism, the river Ganga is worshipped as a deity and is popularly referred to as a mother. That a river be given the title of a mother should not surprise us. For millennia, it has nourished human life with its waters and understandably attracted the reverence of people for its life-giving powers. And you don't foul your mother, not just because it is disrespectful, but also because if her health deteriorates, the conditions of human life will deteriorate too. That is a perfectly valid systemic insight and is common to all cultures in varied forms. Now, even though the figure of Mother Ganga continues to be worshipped today, our understanding is completely devoid of the all-important systemic insight which was the original impulse behind worshipping it. So, even though millions flock to her shows every day to perform all kinds of rituals, that reverence does not translate into any concern about the actual well-being of the river and the creatures that live in it and depend on it. And by the way, I'm not counting any shallow attempt at beautification of some stretches of riverfront as genuine concern. So there doesn't seem to be any cognitive dissonance in calling something your mother while also using it as a collective dumping zone for all kinds of waste. I don't think this is due to a moral failing of individual religious people, but rather it is a part of a social phenomenon in which religion is almost entirely divorced from its systemic aspect, mostly to accommodate the needs of our industrial economy. In my view, worshipping Mother Ganga should inspire in us not only concern for the well-being of that particular river, but also of all the riverine systems that sustain us and which we are actively destroying. Similar notions can be extended to hill goddesses and forest deities, both of which we are also annihilating at a tremendous pace. I don't want to tell religious people how to practice their religion, but it is up to them to decide whether they want their religion to support an ecological mindset or they want it to be something which encourages the basest chauvinistic tendencies of the human psyche. If we follow the argument I have been making and think of the world as fundamentally alive, then the pain and suffering our way of life is inflicting on our cohabitants on this planet takes on an even more ghastly quality. Our instinctive and quite justified reaction is to want to lessen that suffering, and it is our responsibility as individuals to alter our lifestyle so that we don't participate in as much ecological destruction as we do now. But there's a problem. Living as we do under global capitalism, our lifestyles are so inextricably linked with its exploitative and destructive machinery that we very quickly run into structural limits of how much we can make our lives more ecological while still living inside the system. You can shift to local organic produce, become a vegan, commute by public transport, segregate your waste and recycle. That's great. But then you realize you don't have any control over where your water and power come from. and most of the commodities you buy will be tainted by human and environmental exploitation, and most of the waste you generate is still going to end up in a landfill or the ocean. The only way to further lessen the pain and suffering of others is to leave the system entirely if you can and become a hermit in the woods, totally isolated, but at least you're not causing so much harm to other creatures, right? But then imagine a Jain monk shows up at your cottage in the woods and is like, what do you mean you're not causing harm? You escape capitalism, but you can't escape your body. The mere fulfillment of our basic biological needs causes the death of other creatures, and if you want to reduce that, you must embrace extreme forms of asceticism like I have. I'm not trying to caricaturize the very legitimate impulse of sensitive people to reduce the harm done to other living creatures. All I'm saying is that if you follow that impulse to its logical conclusions, your only fate is suicide, because even extreme asceticism and self-mortification cannot reduce the harm you cause to zero. Thus, a life-affirming impulse, when taken to its extreme, can end up negating life itself. Now, there is another extreme interpretation that I can make from the very same ecological outlook I have been promoting. I can say that, well, since all individual things emerge from the same underlying unity and return to it, these individual forms are just momentary illusions. Pain, suffering, and death are meaningless because everything is a manifestation of the same deeper reality. Hence, we have no responsibility to intervene in the world. All we can do is to dispassionately witness this ceaseless transformation of forms from being to non-being and back. If we end up destroying the world, well, then that is just the playing out of the underlying unitive principle. I've actually encountered people who espouse milder versions of this kind of holistic nihilism, and if you watch Rakesh Mehra's 2001 movie Ux, you can see an extreme version of this ideology in action. Here, Manoj Bajpayee's character believes that the non-dualism of the Gita permits him to murder people because, according to him, there is no one who is dying and no one who is killing. Both are instruments of the same unitive principle at the core of reality. Although I disagree with both, I'm not going to offer any arguments against either of these extreme interpretations. I will only add that despite being diametrically opposed philosophically, they lead to the same practical outcome: total disengagement of the individual from society and social concerns. If one is opposed to such an outcome, then it is up to each one of us to figure out a balance between these extremes and, in our own way, walk the middle path. I know it is quite self-indulgent, but I hope you all will forgive me if I wrap things up with a personal anecdote. Like any other wannabe pretentious intellectual type, I read Camus' Myth of Sisyphus while I was in college. I don't think I understood more than 15-20% of it, to be honest, but I felt like I had somewhat grasped one of the central ideas of the book, that is, Camus' characterization of the absurd. As I understand it, for Camus, the notion of the absurd emerges from the universe's denial of a yearning for oneness with it. We call out to the universe, but instead of the universe answering back, we hear only deafening silence. When we experience this painful, irresolvable contradiction, we come face to face with the absurd. It was all a bit hazy and not so well defined, but I think I got the basic idea, and it appealed to me because at that time I felt like it was an accurate description of the human condition, and also because I felt really clever holding such an enlightened view. So I kind of adopted it as my general outlook about the world and went on with my life. Now, this was some 10-12 years ago, and for most of that time, I found no reason to reconsider this outlook. However, over the last 2-3 years, partly because of events in my personal life and partly because of a vague sense of intellectual dissatisfaction, there was a major shift in my thinking. And as I started getting into all this ecology stuff, one day I realized that without even being aware of it, I'd stopped believing in Camus' idea of the absurd, and moreover, I found myself disagreeing with his entire framing of the problem. It no longer felt like an accurate description of the human condition, and I was like, why did I believe in that for so long? And in thinking of an answer, I was reminded of a song by the Icelandic musician Björk, which has this hypnotic, hymn-like quality where she keeps repeating the words, all is full of love, all is full of love, it's all around you. And in the latter half of the song, she says that if you can't feel that all is full of love, that's not because it's not there. It's because you have closed yourself to it. Your doors are all shut, she says. Someone is trying to call you, but your phone is off the hook. I really believe that Camus' framing of the problem and my agreement with it is a symptom of how deeply the mechanical worldview and its ontology of death have embedded themselves in our minds. Forget about regular people like us. They even condition a sensitive soul like Camus to become, in some sense, deaf to the music of the universe. I think Björk is right, and her artistic insight is as valid as any scientific theory. All is full of love. The universe and each and everything in it is radiating it outwards to you. And if you don't close yourself to it, you will feel it. You don't have to struggle with the contradiction. Once your outlook changes, the contradiction just kind of vanishes away. I'm not sharing all this to gloat about refuting Camus. That is not my intention. But I feel the only practical suggestion I can make to you in the end is to say that maybe, just maybe, we should try opening up the doors and windows of our hearts and see what happens. I can sense the pragmatists and the anxious revolutionaries among you scoffing and rolling their eyes as I say this. And yes, I am kind of cringing myself out too. But it's the only thing I can think of which, while it may not do any good, at least it won't do any harm. So please, if you will, open your doors, put the phone back on the receiver and just listen.
You'll be given love. You'll be taken care of. You'll be given love. You have to trust it. Maybe not from these sources. You have poured yours. Maybe not from the directions you are staring at. Trust your head around. It's all around you. All is full of love. All around you. All is full of love. You just ain't